I read the inscription engraved on the inside of the pocket watch cover. This must be similar to how a woman feels when the man she loves gives her a ring and asks for her hand in marriage. A true declaration of love. It was our 7th anniversary. We were sitting in our favorite Italian restaurant drinking good Chianti. Cassie had the sweetest smile on her face as she watched me open the box containing the silver pocket watch and chain. I thought it would look good on your leather Harley vest. I know watches aren't as functional as they once were, but I wanted to give you something completely impractical for a change. I admired the beauty of the Swiss Tissot watch and reread the inscription. Take me with you? Suddenly, Cassie looked sad. I know you're leaving tomorrow. I was wondering if it's too late to ask to go with you? Cassie's request silenced me, and before I could respond, tears were streaming down her cheeks. I met Cassie 8 years ago when we were both working summer jobs at one of Seattle's upscale restaurants on the South Lake Union. Cassie Taylor just finished her first year teaching health and physical education at a suburban high school. She spent her summer vacations working as a waitress. I, Edward Bud O'Brien, had 3 years of experience teaching biology in an urban Catholic school. I spent my summers in the good old Irish tradition, working as a bartender. It took me 20 minutes of my first shift to fall in love with her big brown eyes and friendly smile. Cassie is one of those rare women who lights up a room and makes you feel special just by being around her. It also didn't hurt that she had the slender body of a runner with long, toned legs. When she walked away from the waiter with a tray of pints, I must have stared at her because Jake elbowed me in the ribs. Careful, bud. I don't want to step on your tongue. It was my first day at the restaurant after the end of the school year. I had to ask Jake, who worked full-time at the bar. What can you tell me about her? She's a teacher like you started last weekend. Her name is Cassie. She's free, friendly, sweet, and completely out of your league. Jake made that last comment while laughing. I had a reputation as a ladies' man, a guy with exceptional luck in meeting the more attractive women who frequented our bar. I can't claim to have been anything special other than the lucky recipient of the great genes of my father, Edward O'Brien Sr., which earned me the nickname Bud, rather than Junior, thankfully, and my mother, Anna Maria Simoncelli. I did my best to please Miss Cassie Taylor over the next 2 weeks. She was always friendly, but she declined my invitations to have a cup of coffee or go to a show. Meanwhile, I refused all attention and direct invitations from the ladies who hung out at the bar, which was difficult, especially when Sarah Goodwin walked in one evening. Sarah and I had met several times over the previous 2 summers. We would end up on her father's 38-foot boat on Lake Union and try to keep the boat moving until dawn. The woman was insatiable. And what a body she had. That evening, when Sarah walked into the bar to rekindle our summer romance, it was hard for me to refuse, but I apologized, saying that I already had a preliminary agreement that could not be canceled. Sarah promised to stop by in a few days. Get ready for a treat, boy. I spent April in Miami and learned some new tricks. Jake was there when I turned Sarah down and gave me a look. What was it? He asked, knowing Sarah's reputation as a sex bomb. How about you and Gwen join me for coffee and pie at the diner after work tonight? Okay? Gwen, Jake's wife. She worked the same shift, was like the big sister I never had, and treated me with sisterly affection. Jake thought it was serious. I'll ask Gwen, but I'm sure she'll say yes. We closed at 1 o'clock, and I met up with Jake and Gwen at the 24-hour diner on the avenue. It was late, so we didn't have to wait for a table. Flo took our order, and I got straight to the point. Why is Cassie rejecting me? I acted like a gentleman and asked her out 3 times. Is she dating someone? Gwen laughed as she replied that one of the reasons I love Jake's wife, another is how much she respects and loves the big Norwegian. This is too funny, Bud. She must be in a serious relationship if she turns you down. Flo came to the table with our coffee and pie. Gwen waited for Flo to serve us, and after we all thanked her, Gwen told me. The other waitresses informed Cassie that you're a womanizer. Your reputation is terrible, Bud, especially Jamie's. You may not have considered your relationship with Jamie last summer to be exclusive, but she did. And after she found out you spent the night on Sarah's boat while you were dating, she hates you. The well is poisoned. I had to defend myself. It wasn't my fault. We never promised each other anything. It's time to face the facts, bud. You can continue to get girls in bed, but decent women who want more than a quickie are taboo for you. I noticed that Jake had been silent all this time and was filling his mouth with pie. He had already finished his and began to eat Gwen's threshold. He looked up and nodded in my direction. The implication was clear. He agreed with Gwen. It was time to convince them. I know I was a ladies' man for the first 2 years you knew me, but I wasn't always that way. I remained faithful to my high school girlfriend until I received a Dear John letter from her while serving in Afghanistan. In college, I was completely faithful to the girl I dated until our relationship took a turn for the worse before graduation. She said my scars were a constant reminder of how stupid I was to join the military right out of high school. It took me a couple of years to even think about opening my heart again and trusting someone after 2 failed relationships. I spent the last year reinventing myself, getting back to who I was. Turns out I didn't need psychoanalysis. Spending time with my mom and dad helped me get back on track. And seeing you two together just confirms that. Jake and Gwen listened to me. They were probably shocked to find out who they were sitting with, and not the immature playboy who had spent the last 2 summers bedding any decent-looking girl. That's where I am now. I want to date Cassie. I like her physically, and I like her friendliness. Call it what you will, but from the first look in her eyes and smile, I wanted to get to know her better. Help me do this, and I will promise you both that I will be an absolute gentleman. Even if she and I are not right for each other, and it doesn't lead to anything, I will not betray your trust. I promise. Here's the thing. Gwen was a complete and hopeless romantic. In her heart, she hoped that everyone would have the chance to have a relationship as great as theirs. My statement touched her deeply. She grabbed my hand across the table and smiled with tears in her eyes. I had an ally. For the rest of the week, the 4 of us sat in Gwen and Jake's backyard while Jake grilled salmon. We ate, drank, laughed, and shared stories. I fell in love with Cassie. She accepted my proposal at Christmas, and we got married in June. We honeymooned in Maui. Believe it or not, this was the first time I saw Cassie in a bikini. Our courtship was so short and filled with so many other responsibilities, mostly work and wedding planning, that I never stopped to realize how little experience we shared until that week in Maui. Yes, we made love for the first time 2 months after we started dating, but we weren't living together. Cassie was still living with her mom and dad. A very traditional, old-fashioned couple. Her parents frowned every time we spent a rare weekend together before the wedding. Cassie wasn't a virgin, but her previous boyfriends could be counted on her father's fingers, even though he was missing 2 fingers due to an industrial injury. The honeymoon in Maui was the first time I pushed Cassie into a few new pranks. Nothing extraordinary, at least for most couples, and nowhere near what Sarah and I did. I surprised Cassie with a leopard print nightgown and bikini that had half the material of what she had brought with her. "Where could I wear this?" she asked, after she finally agreed to try on a bikini for me in our room. "There's a quiet beach on the southwest side of the island. We'll go there. No one will be within 100 feet of us. And I can watch you in the sun." Cassie agreed, and we spent a lovely day sunbathing and playing in the surf. The next day, when we went snorkeling on the boat, she put on her more modest bikini, still a bold choice for her, and I told her how great she looked. Small steps, because this wonderful woman was worth the patience. The next 6 years were wonderful. Cassie and I got along great. We were best friends and passionate lovers. Cassie continued to open up sexually. One thing we didn't do was we never had sexual relations with other people. Our sex life was entirely between us, and as far as I thought, as good as it could be. Cassie and I had one major disagreement in our relationship, and it didn't come up until after our 6th anniversary. I have been interested in motorcyclists since childhood. It started with trail bikes. In my early 20s, I rode a sport bike, my Honda CBR 1000. I traded in the sport bike and bought a Harley Road King customized for 2 the summer I met Cassie. For our first 6 years together, Cassie shared my love of traveling by bike. My engagement gift to her was a set of leather clothes and a heated vest. She already had the helmet I bought her when we first started dating. During our engagement, we spent one weekend traveling to Vancouver and another on the Orcas Island ferry. The summer after the wedding, we spent our weekends, which were Tuesday and Wednesday because we were still working at the restaurant during summer break, traveling to get out of the city. The Northwest U.S. has tons of great roads through the Cascades on routes 20, 12, or 410, along the Columbia River on Route 14, and many more. The best part? Spending hours cruising these roads with the love of my life on the back of a motorcycle. Cassie loved these trips as much as I did. Until the day, about 3 weeks after our 6th anniversary, when two of our friends, Mark and Judy Koluski, were killed when a drunk driver ran a red light and Mark was unable to brake in time to avoid the collision. Mark died instantly, but Judy remained in intensive care for 2 weeks before succumbing to her injuries. During those 2 weeks, Cassie and I visited her twice. I've never seen Cassie so upset. Cassie never got on my bike again. And to make matters worse, she started pestering me to sell my bike. I thought she was being unreasonable and never considered how my refusal to even discuss it would ultimately affect our marriage. In my defense, I didn't pressure Cassie to get on my bike, although I missed our weekends spent riding around the countryside in the summer. I tried to explain why I thought I was a safer and better driver than Mark. I probably rode less than 1,000 miles over the next 9 months, but I didn't get rid of the bike. I never considered how devastated Cassie was after spending hours at Judy's bedside. Cassie was slowly drifting away from me, emotionally and physically, but so slowly that I barely noticed until the following April. It was mid-April when I realized that we had not made love for the past 3 weeks, and probably only once every 2 weeks for the previous 2 months. We haven't spent an entire weekend together since February, although I did go on a Saturday road trip with local band HOG, Harley Owners Group, during spring break. The house was dark and cold the evening I returned from this trip. Cassie had spent the day at her parents' and didn't return home until 10 o'clock at night. The few times we talked about it, we had the same conversation, over and over again. "Bud, I can't imagine having kids if you keep riding that thing. I'm not going to be a lonely widow raising our kids alone." Of course, I always pointed out how unreasonable she was. "Cassie, look at all our motorcycle friends who are still riding and haven't had an accident." We walked in circles. Cassie pulled statistics from the internet and showed me newspaper articles to prove her point. I did my best to counter her arguments. I've been riding a motorcycle since I was 12, except when I was abroad, and I've never had an accident. One of the great benefits of living in Western Washington is the lack of harsh winters. I would have a hard time not getting on my bike at least once every 2 weeks. We weren't moving anywhere and were moving away from each other. Much later, I learned that there was a snake in the garden who wanted to take advantage of our disagreement. By the end of May, I was tired of it. Cassie and I barely spoke and tried to avoid each other. We shared dinners and a bed, but our conversations were purely utilitarian, without a spark of intimacy in or out of bed. The marriage was on life support, if not already dead. I made a decision. As soon as the school year is over, I'll get on my bike and spend 4 weeks doing what I've always wanted to do, cross the country and back again. To make a statement, I was leaving the day after our 7th anniversary. Screw it. I wasn't a complete asshole. I told Cassie my plans and started sleeping in the guest room 3 weeks before I was scheduled to leave. Within the first week of my announcement, I would come home to find Cassie crying in the living room. I was surprised. I really didn't think she cared. The thing is, I still loved her. As much as I tried to harden my heart to the fact that our marriage was over, I wanted to hug her and magically make our problems disappear. But all of us scientific types know that there is no such thing as magic. On the morning of our anniversary, Cassie asked if we could have dinner that night at a nice Italian restaurant downtown that we liked. "Why not?" was my dry answer. We dressed up. Cassie wore my favorite blue dress and 5-inch heels. I put on a suit and tie. It was a weekday, so the restaurant was half empty. As usual, as we walked to our table, some of the other diners looked at us with approval. With Cassie next to me, we really looked like a great couple. We ordered a bottle of wine while we read the menu. After ordering, while we were tasting the wine, Cassie pulled out a box from her small clutch purse. As I read the inscription out loud, Cassie asked a question. "I know you're leaving tomorrow. I was wondering if it's too late to ask to go with you." I almost fell off my chair in surprise. Between the beautiful pocket watch, the touching inscription, and her request to accompany me on a motorcycle ride, I was amazed. I struggled to get the words out. "I would be happy. I want to start over, bud. I want to be your lover and friend again. I'm still terrified of the thought of riding your bike, but I've thought about it. I'd like to try to share it with you again." I didn't give Cassie my gift, which was in the breast pocket of my jacket, a homemade postcard with a photo on the front of me, sitting on my bike waving goodbye. No words, just my wedding ring inside. If Cassie noticed that I wasn't wearing it, she didn't say anything. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, tore up the card, and returned the ring to its place. When I returned, our dinner was already on the table. "I didn't give you anything. I know. You were going to leave me. Just tell me that you still love me and want this. That would be the best gift of all. And also that you put your wedding ring back on." Cassie gave me her millionth smile. We returned home that night and made love twice. I delayed my departure for a day and spent it preparing the bike for Cassie and her things. Cassie spent the day preparing our apartment for our month-long absence. We will be on the road for 30 days. 8,000 miles will be covered in 20 days on the road and 10 days of rest, entertainment, and sightseeing. Bud, do you believe in divine intervention? We were in a hotel bed outside of Spokane the first night of our trip. I thought it was a strange question so late at night and couldn't understand why Cassie would bring it up now. You mean when God or a higher power intervenes on a person's behalf? Yes, something like that. Cassie and I had discussed religion and our views on God several times before, but like many modern couples, religion was not a central part of our lives. Although I was raised Catholic and taught in a Catholic school, it had been many years since I had been to church for anything other than a wedding or funeral. I wasn't sure if this was the best time to think about such a deep topic. We'd been on the road most of the day and had just had a few mugs of strong ale, but something was bothering Cassie, and I didn't want to miss the opportunity to figure out what was bothering her. So I answered, "Well, we talked earlier about how I struggled with the idea of a Hashem, and even if I could believe in a Hashem, could I accept that he directs our actions or even the weather, the oceans, nature? That's even harder for me to accept, da. Why? Because I can't reconcile the idea of an all-powerful God with all the terrible things that happen in the world. But what about all the good, wonderful things that are happening? I understand what you're saying. My mom still prays and she believes it helps. When Dad recovered from cancer, she truly believed it was because of her prayers to St. Jude, and I would be the last person to try to refute her faith." Cassie nodded. "Yes, I know. Why does God answer one person's prayers and not another? Or why would any God allow a little child to get cancer? I've struggled with these questions too." We spent the next half hour exchanging views. I was on the verge of asking Cassie what prompted her to bring up the subject when I noticed her eyelids closing. After a minute, Cassie started purring like she does when she falls asleep. It's been a long day. I'll have to wait to ask my question. The next morning, we woke up late, grabbed a quick bite at the hotel breakfast bar, and got back on the bike. Continuing to avoid interstates, we headed northeast on US 2 to Whitefish. When I ride a motorcycle, I block out all external stimuli except the road and the scenery. No loud radio or other electronic noise. I don't read a map or check my smartphone for messages or calls. All the distractions that tempt me in the car are absent when I'm driving. I use this time to reflect. My mind achieves a certain clarity. The sensation is best explained in Robert Pirsig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, or Melissa Pearson's The Ultimate Vehicle. Understanding motorcycles. When Cassie started riding with me, which was her first experience on a motorcycle, she had a hard time understanding my passion for two wheels. She didn't understand how we could drive for hours without talking. I gave Cassie both of the above books to read. Then, after spending more time on the back of my bike, in the privacy of her helmet, watching the world go by, seeing things you never see sitting in the box of a car. She agreed with me that it had become a special way to share without words. When I suggested buying a couple of communication devices for our helmets, Cassie looked at me as if I was crazy. "Never," was all she said. So today, the day after Cassie's strange question about divine intervention, we were probably both enjoying some privacy and a chance to reflect on our lives and marriage. That night, Cassie finally opened up and told me what had been troubling her these past months. We sat on the deck of the hotel's outdoor pool. It was already after 10, and there was no one around. I had a can of beer, and Cassie had a plastic glass of cheap Merlot. "I almost cheated on you." I wasn't surprised. I somehow suspected that something was going on at least since February. What surprised and relieved me most was that she used the word slightly. "There's a guy at school you met once. His name is Owen Miller, and he made it clear that he wanted me to leave you and marry him." I tried to remain calm. "It sounds like you two spent a lot of time together. You said almost cheated? What do you mean?" Cassie laid it all out. "It means that I spent too much time sharing intimate details of our life with him and allowed him to get into my thoughts. After I told him about my fears that you would end up like Mark, Owen used it. He knew that I wanted to have children. He showed me articles in the newspaper every time there was an accident. I let him convince me that you couldn't love me unless you were willing to give up the ride. He planted in my brain the idea that I shouldn't let you be the father of my children if you're just going to leave me a widow and our children fatherless. I can see how this could affect you, especially considering how little attention I paid to your fears after Mark and Judy died. I didn't tell you. Part of my reaction was because Judy was 3 months pregnant when she died. Only Mark and I knew she wanted to wait until the second trimester before telling anyone else because she had lost their first child. Because of the miscarriage. I don't know why I didn't tell you. Maybe because you were already grieving over the loss of a close friend. And I didn't see the point in making it worse. So I just carried it inside of me, and it was affecting me more than I realized. The news about the baby was terrible, but I wanted to get back to our marriage and Cassie's case. How far did you go with Miller? We had a makeout session. What? Like in high school? No groping? I saw how difficult it was for her to answer my question, but she answered. No groping, just kissing. Don't say only. The fact that you kissed that idiot is driving me crazy. I was starting to lose my composure. Cassie began to cry again. I'm sorry. Yes, I kissed him, but I never touched him, and he never had the chance to touch my breasts or anything. Why? What happened? After our makeout session, he told me that he had booked a room at the Sheraton for the following Saturday. By then, you and I were barely talking, and I could leave for the day without bothering you. We met in the lobby and got into the elevator. The doors were closing, and then they opened again. There was an elderly couple standing in front of us. They apologized for pressing the call button too soon, but I smiled and told them everything was fine and held the door open for them. They were so sweet, both smiling, holding hands. The woman looked at me and said they were celebrating their 40th anniversary. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You'll never know how good someone can be. Life until you spend so many years with the one man you love and who loves you." Just then, the elevator doors opened. The couple got off on the 22nd floor, one floor below us, still smiling and holding hands. Before the doors closed, I pressed the open button and jumped out of the elevator. Owen followed me and asked what I was doing. I told him I was avoiding the biggest mistake of my life. I went back downstairs, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove home. I sat there looking at my wife, unable to say anything at that moment. Cassie filled the silence. When I asked you yesterday if you believed in divine intervention, here's why. How could I be so close to committing adultery and be so lucky that there was that couple in the elevator? Sometimes I think they were angels. You may not have slept with him or committed adultery, but you definitely cheated, emotionally and definitely physically when you kissed him. That's what your mom said. My mom? Yes, I've been talking to your mom since it happened. I didn't know who else to turn to. I was so confused. We've met several times over the past 3 weeks. She told me to ask if I could join her on this trip. She told me that I couldn't hide behind the technicality of not actually having sex with another man, and that I needed to open up to you. She knows me so well after all these years. And your mom, the smartest man I know. Cassie looked into my eyes as she sat across from me, practically holding her breath. It's going to take me a while to process this. I'm so angry at you right now. What should I do? Should I take another room to give you space? Should I fly home? No, neither of these will do any good. Damn, Cassie. I still love you. But finding out how you let that idiot come between us really pisses me off. I saw Cassie sigh with relief, realizing that I had chosen neither the first nor the second option. She still had a chance to stay married to me. But I wasn't going to let her get off too easily. She was one step away from me leaving her. The only thing that allowed this marriage to hang by a thread was that she didn't sleep with that idiot. We're not out of the woods yet, Cassie. Give me time to figure out how we can fix this, if it's even possible. This will keep her quiet for a while and give her something to think about. We slept in the same bed, but it was a large bed, which allowed us to avoid her touching. I didn't even kiss her goodnight. The next morning, I decided to spend another day at the motel, my emotions too high to drive safely. We spent hours by the pool talking, but holding back the alcohol to keep the conversation civil. Around noon, a thought occurred to me. Are you still talking? He calls, I don't answer. Then he sends a message and I don't answer. I delete the texts as soon as they come. Next time he texts you, let me know. Don't delete it. One of the lucky moments in this whole saga, Owen Miller was the assistant principal of Cassie's school. If it had been another teacher, I would have little influence over this idiot. But as a member of the administration, he was in a deep hole. It didn't take long before Cassie received a text message from him. Why don't you answer me? I thought we had something special. Please leave me alone. Walking up to your room at the Sheraton was the stupidest thing I've ever done. Come on. You wanted this just as much as I did. Don't pretend to be innocent. I thought you were my friend. I'm your friend, but I can be more. You need to find out how much more. It's hard to believe that any man has more than my husband. Miller must have been drunk. Otherwise, there is no explanation for what he did next. And he probably only did this because Cassie told him earlier that she was deleting all his texts, assuming I still don't know anything. Miller sent a photo. The fool didn't realize that I was now holding him by the balls. I told you to leave me alone. Don't write or call me anymore. I showed Cassie a series of texts, including photos. Is this the idiot you were going to replace me with? Cassie just sobbed and apologized over and over again. It was a long night. Of course, he continued to send texts over the next few days. Each message deepened the hole he had begun to dig for himself. We were on the road again. It's a shame we couldn't enjoy Glacier National Park more than we did. We both tried to get back into the right frame of mind. I admit, Cassie tried her best. We had our ups and downs, but I stayed calm and told her to stop walking on eggshells. Over the next 4 days and nights, we talked and planned how we could overcome this and connect again. We made love again, and it really helped. We checked into a roadside motel about an hour before Madison. It was a decent day traveling through the Wisconsin Dells. We planned to stay an extra night in the area to recover from the 1,600 miles since our last stop in Whitefish. After showering and changing clothes, we walked across the street to a tavern that the motel manager said had a great fish plate and cold beer. Cassie was dressed in a modest sundress with flip-flops. Nothing too flashy considering we were in an unfamiliar city. The fish was cooked just right and they had Leinenkugel beer on tap. It was nice that they had something other than the ubiquitous Coors Light and Bud Light. I finished my second beer and asked Cassie if she was ready to go back to the motel when someone started playing the jukebox. A big guy, he had to be at least 6 feet 4 inches tall and 250 pounds, walked up to our table. He ignored me and stared at Cassie, running his eyes up and down her body. Let's go dance. He extended his hand to Cassie. That's the thing with infidelity. It makes you doubt your spouse. Trust either disappears or is at least questioned. It was less than 5 seconds, but in that 5-second pause, Cassie and I looked at each other. I wondered if Cassie wanted to dance with this guy. Cassie later told me that she was waiting for me to step in and tell him she was unavailable while I was waiting for her to say no. The big guy took advantage of those 5 seconds. He placed his hand on the top of Cassie's arm and pulled her to her feet. This action caused Cassie to react. "I don't want to dance with you," she said, breaking free from his grip. "What the hell, you don't want to?" was his response as he grabbed her again. By then, I had already risen from the table, grabbing his other hand. "I'd appreciate it if you'd leave my wife alone. She said she didn't want to dance." I thought that if my request was polite, it might diffuse the situation. The big guy moved quickly and did the unexpected. He turned to me, let go of Cassie, and pulled the hunting knife from its sheath on his hip, cursing, "Don't you dare touch me." He swung the knife as I jumped back, but the knife ran across my arm as I tried to protect myself from the blade. He rushed at me again. I retreated to the pool table and grabbed the cue. My right hand was bleeding, but with my good left hand I held the cue tightly, swinging it while holding the pool table between us. I must have really pissed him off because he made the stupid mistake of feinting to the right and moving to the left. The feint did not deceive me, and when he rounded my right side, I hit him with a good blow of the cue. This only angered him further, and he came at me in a rage. I pushed the back of the cue straight into his mouth and knocked him out. At that moment, the police arrived. They had to call an ambulance for the big guy. One of his friends tried to pick up his teeth from the floor. He seemed to think the dentist could put them back in. I wrapped a piece of gauze around my arm that one of the medics gave me while they tended to the big guy. I barely had time to wrap it when the sheriff handcuffed me and read my rights. "Where are you taking him?" Cassie was on the verge of screaming. "He will be processed and jailed. At best, there will be a bail hearing tomorrow." "But he didn't do anything until the guy grabbed me. Then the guy pulled out a knife and cut him." Cassie tried her best to stand up for me, but the sheriff wouldn't listen. He told his deputy to take statements from the people at the bar. Before I was taken out, I saw 2 or 3 of the big guy's friends huddled around the deputy. I found out later that they didn't even take Cassie's statement. In fact, they kicked her out of the police station when she went there to try to tell them again what happened. When I tried to tell the sheriff my side, he smirked. "So why should I believe some out-of-town yuppie and not one of the citizens of our city, especially when no one else in the bar disputes his friend's story?" There's a lot I wanted to say, but when it comes to dealing with local police, it's best to avoid confrontation. Hell, for all I knew, this cop could be the giant's cousin. So I kept my answers polite. "Because you know I'm telling the truth. Travis says your wife was hitting on all the guys at the bar, said you were jealous and started a fight." This was complete nonsense because Cassie never left our table while we were there. "You asked my wife if it was true?" Well, I've found that very few women admit to being approachable, especially after a fight. Cassie and I apparently got caught in a time loop and ended up back in the 50s. I decided to go a different route. Am I entitled to a telephone call? 3 hours later, I was still sitting in the holding cell when I heard a commotion. Someone in the square was persistently cursing. Soon the deputy opened my cell and let me out. We entered the room and I saw a tall man who was harshly criticizing the sheriff. "Are you crazy? You have a prisoner who needs medical attention and you keep him locked up? Not to mention he shouldn't have been arrested for self-defense in the first place." It turns out that this man was one of the assistant district attorneys. My commander in Afghanistan, Captain Roberts, was now the district attorney of Western Kansas, and he was the recipient of my only phone call. Good to know the right people. He had to make the right calls to the right people on my behalf. The assistant district attorney was still speaking loudly. "Did you know that this out-of-town yuppie, as you called him, has 2 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star?" I admit, I liked how the sheriff got reprimanded. The assistant district attorney looked at me. "Sorry about all this. I have my car outside. Let's look at your hand." We got out and drove 4 miles to the emergency room. On the way, he gave me his business card after writing his cell number on it. I thanked him again, and we parted. It turned out that my hand needed 20 stitches, and the tendon in my index finger was severed and required surgery. So I couldn't ride a motorcycle, because I wouldn't be able to brake or accelerate. Cassie met me at the hospital. She returned to the motel and spent time calling and trying to find help after the sheriff kicked her out of the police station. The next morning, all charges against me were dropped, and I was allowed to leave the county. We rented a U-Haul truck, secured the bike in it, and headed west. So my dream of traveling from one end of the country to the other remained a dream. Cassie and I took turns driving the truck, stopping the first night for a few hours of rest and returning home by midnight on the second day, exhausted but glad to sleep in our own bed. I decided to make waves and give the sheriff something to think about. I hired an aggressive lawyer from his county and sued the county and the sheriff. We settled the case for $100,000. The lawyer took 30%. We could have gotten more, but I refused to sign the non-disclosure agreement. My lawyer didn't like this because it significantly reduced his payout. Last I heard, the sheriff lost the next election. It's a pity, and he's damn unlucky. Cassie and I continued to work on our marriage with the support of my parents instead of a professional counselor. We had a good chance of success because Cassie was truly sorry for what she had done. It helped that we had great friends and role models in Jake and Gwen, and of course, we realized how close each of us was to losing the best thing in our lives. Meanwhile, it's payback time for Mr. Owen Miller. Any thoughts of physical retribution disappeared after the bar fight. The damage I did to the big guy was public information. If I were caught, this beating could be used against me in any criminal or civil case. My revenge had to be legal. We hired an employment lawyer and shared a series of texts and voicemails that Cassie received from Miller. Miller countered with some nonsense about how Cassie was a seductress who wouldn't leave him alone. The school district foolishly refused Cassie's transfer request. So Cassie quit and started working full-time at the restaurant. It was Cassie's decision to quit. Although she loved teaching, I agreed that it was the right decision for our current situation. We decided to play hard. I called a friend who worked at the Seattle Times. The headline in Sunday's Seattle Times read, "When no means yes." The subtitle read, "When a local school district administrator won't take no for an answer." The Cassie School District ended up experiencing major upheaval. Not only was Owen Miller fired, but 2 administrators at the district's central office were demoted. After 2 years, we eventually settled the case for $200,000 and 2 years' salary. I'm not one for lawsuits, but in today's world, that's usually the only way to get justice. I recently read Chernov's biography of Alexander Hamilton. It's amazing that a couple of 100 years ago, men settled their differences with dueling pistols. Unfortunately, the person who was right did not always emerge victorious. Just think, not much has changed. Now the guy with a better, more ruthless lawyer will probably win. Lawyers instead of pistols. Cassie and I have nothing to complain about. Everything worked out well for us in the end, but not perfect. The hospital in Wisconsin didn't treat my hand properly, and I had to go under the knife again so I could use my right index finger. I couldn't ride a motorcycle for 2 months because of the cast and therapy. Maybe it was a sign. By then, Cassie and I were fully committed to each other again, and we're talking about buying a house and having kids. After finishing my rehab, I boarded the Road King and headed northeast toward the North Cascade Highway. I spent the day alone and made a decision. Without telling Cassie, I put the bike up for sale and sold it within a week. It took her a few days, but one day Cassie came home from her new job at the local gym and asked me, "Bud, where's your bike?" I stood at the stove, stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce, my grandmother's recipe that Cassie adores. I sold it, with a tone of, "Okay, not a big loss." "Why did you do it?" "Why do you think so?" "I hope you didn't do this because of me." I almost laughed at the absurdity of her statement. She continued, "Bud, I tried. I stopped asking you to quit skating. You didn't have to sell it. That's what made it possible. It wasn't something you forced. It was my decision, mine alone." Cassie ran into my arms and hugged me tightly. "How do you know?" Now I was puzzled. "I learned that." "How did you know I was pregnant?" "I only found out today." frost on the skin. I hugged Cassie and told her how glad I was. We'll start looking for a house with a yard this weekend. I don't remember ever receiving a kiss like this before. Look how wrong you can be. I wrote earlier that as a scientist, I do not believe in magic. 20 weeks later, holding a photo of Cassie's ultrasound, I changed my mind. Twins. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.